today I walked out of my methods exam full well knowing that I failed. And it wasn't the kind of failure that surprised me. It was the failure that emptied me and drained me. Because I knew how much work and how much effort I'd put into this methods exam, knowing and hoping that I would get a good score just to impress those around me. I did the practice exams over and over. I did so many practice questions, maybe not as much compared to some other kids, maybe a lot more compared to some other kids, but to me, I did so many practice exams. I studied every topic over and over, every single type of question that would have been on exam. I timed myself, I revised the things that I messed up on the marking schemes, and on paper, I'd done almost everything right. However, the paper that I sat in front of that day wasn't the same as the papers that I had mastered. My brain, which was the same exact one that performed so perfectly and so well on the exams that I did at home, didn't show up in the same way. It was really upsetting to me. It was a really strange thing, as a matter of fact. How, that few moments of confusion when I'm seeing a paper for the first time can erase the weeks and even months of discipline that I put into this exam. Walking out of that exam, I'd realized something that I really didn't want to realize or didn't want to face at all. I thought that I was in control. I really did. I thought that if I did enough practice papers, if I thought that I was in control, not of the test, but of the thing that the test owed me, and by doing the work, I'd earn that right to stability. I'd earn that right to control and knowing that I would do well on this test. I thought that my preparation was kind of a shield against the uncertainty of the exam, and that my effort guaranteed fairness in the face of this exam, in the face of the scheme. What I came to realize, which I didn't want to realize, was that it doesn't. Sometimes you give absolutely everything to an exam, not even just an exam. Sometimes you give absolutely everything as a whole, and everything still falls apart. And it wasn't because you were lazy, and it wasn't because you didn't care, and it wasn't because anything like that. It was simply because control wasn't a part of the deal. Effort as a whole doesn't purchase success. All effort purchases is readiness. And readiness will never ever mean perfection. All it really means is that you were willing, you had the power within you to try honestly to succeed. Over and over in my head, I keep replaying those moments in the exam. The shakiest pen in my head, the questions that I kept overthinking, as simple as they were, I overthought, and the questions that were so hard that I just blanked on them and wasted so much time. It was the feeling of that version of me who studied so hard, and I came to the realization that feeling, that version of me, wasn't the same one sitting in the chair. However, maybe that is kind of the message that life keeps trying to show me through all these tests, through all these SACs, through all these exams. And the lesson is that you don't get to choose which version of yourself shows up that day, shows up to do the actual exam. Sometimes the confident one will come, sometimes the prepared one will come, maybe sometimes it's the tired one or the anxious one. However, the lesson here is not to hate that version that arrives, but instead to accept that version that comes, regardless if it's tired, regardless if it's prepared, it's still you. They are still versions of yourself. The world loves the idea that discipline fixes absolutely everything. That if you just work hard enough, the outcome will bend to you. However, the truth is a lot quieter and it's a lot more obscure than that. Just work harder. You can work perfectly and you can still fail. And I know this sounds very copium. It sounds like a lot of the opposite. It sounds very like it's distinct to what I might have said in the past. But, this kind of opened my eyes a bit. You can prepare beautifully and you can still lose. And there is absolutely no formula, no matter who tries to sell you what, there is no formula that makes life predictable, because the genuinity, the beauty of life is that it is unpredictable. However, that doesn't make the effort that you put in meaningless. Again, this isn't some quote. What it does is make the effort that you put in pure. It makes it unfiltered, because effort without guarantee is the only kind of effort that is real at all. When absolutely everything goes right, you're just confirming what you believe. When everything goes wrong, you see what you actually stand for. You see whether or not you just study to win, or because learning it as a content, learning the content as a whole mattered to you, because educating yourself on the thing mattered to you. Were you really just studying to get that score to impress your teacher or your parents, or do you actually care about the content that you learn? It might be the difference between showing up to just be rewarded or showing up because showing up is who you are as a person. I think that today's exam humbled me, and not in a moral way. Instead, in a very human way. This exam, the failure that I received from this exam, regardless of the amount of effort I put in, reminded me that I really don't control much of my life. One thing I can promise to myself is to bring my best to the moment, not bring my best to the moment in my mind, maybe the version of me that showed up today was that tired one. And maybe I had to come to terms with that fact, and I still had to bring the best version of myself. And sometimes I have to come to terms with the fact that my best won't be enough. However, that doesn't make showing up worthless. There is one line that repeats in my head about this kind of topic, and it's that the outcome is none of your business. I used to think that this line was some bullshit, it was just a way to comfort failure, again, just to cope. However, I think that it's actually the highest form of discipline you can actually achieve now. Doing the work with absolutely zero expectation of reward. Working as if success is irrelevant, because the point of working is to build the kind of person who works anyway. To build the person who's disciplined without the incentive of discipline bringing you success along the way. Today, that belief of mine was tested. I believe that. And maybe that is what failure actually is. Maybe failure is not proof that effort doesn't work, but instead just proof that effort alone isn't everything. You can't control everything just by putting in more effort. It's the acceptance that was in control. We are still at mercy of the things like chance, of things like emotion, and things like imperfection. Just like if you show up super tired, you may have slept well, you thought you did, and you will still show up to that exam tired. What are you going to do? You're just going to give up right there? Or are you going to come to terms with the fact that you're tired, with the fact that you're anxious, and just give it your all? You take all that practice that you put in and you just keep trying until you finally come to the acceptance that what you did is the best of what you did. Maybe, just maybe, the most mature thing you can do in this situation, after falling short, after failing, like I did, after knowing that you flunked the test that, it kind of determines whether or not you get into the certain university you want, or if you get into the course you want. The best thing to do, the most mature thing you can do to resolve that is not to look for redemption in that face, but instead to keep walking forwards, simply quieter, simply wiser, and more sharpened by that failure. All you have to do is be steady. Just keep walking. Because failure doesn't erase the hours of work that you spent becoming someone capable. It doesn't erase the months of effort that you put in to prepare yourself for that exam, or whatever it is that you're preparing yourself for. All failure does is expose the truth that control is an illusion. However, commitment isn't. Commitment is steady. And if you're able to hold on to that, if you're able to understand that philosophy, if you're able to face yourself after the storm without any sort of bitterness or frostbite, then maybe, just maybe, you've already passed something far harder than any exam or any test that you could be put through. Because life itself gives you that test to test whether or not you're worthy of succeeding.